The Resident Evil 5 remake was heavily hinted towards with the ending of Capcom's most recent RE entry, 2023's Resident Evil 4. The ending to RE4's remake showcased heavy emphasis on Albert Wesker and his plans, and as many of us know, this is clearly directing towards the events that take place in 2009's Resident Evil 5. We do also get to hear a little snippet of a theme from Resident Evil 5 during this final scene, and I'm pretty sure it's safe to assume, and I'm sure many of you will agree, that we will most likely be getting a Resident Evil 5 remake at some point in the future, possibly within the next 3 Resident Evil entries. Resident Evil 4's remake took the original and improved upon it in many ways, if not every way. Of course, a few things have slipped by and are not as good as the original's iteration, and obviously this would be depending on your personal preference, but for the most part I think it's safe to say they did smash it out of the park in terms of a remake. So today in this video guys, I will be opening up the floor, or potentially expanding on the flaws. I think this is already a big discussion going on, and that is suggesting ways on how they could improve the Resident Evil 5 remake over the original. So kicking it off, we have a darker atmosphere, and this is specifically at the beginning, but throughout the game is also welcome. I think in the original they did a really good job of having that village segment similar to 4 to open up the game and make the player feel really overwhelmed, and in general bring that survival horror factor into the title. But the one thing they did miss out on is having that darker tone and atmosphere in that village segment. A lot of it was in the daytime. It wasn't too scary, especially after the first playthrough. There wasn't too much to be scared of, whereas in Resident Evil 4 we did get the village through the day and then also at night, which I think just really added to the amount of contrast they were able to show with the atmospheres they were able to create. So this is definitely something I think that could be easily added into the story, but it just would take a bit of modifications around what happens so it fits into the timeline properly. But of course with these remake games it is a retcon in a sense, so I'm guessing it shouldn't be too hard for them to do. And then on top of this, still related to the village segment, I think they could make better use of the executioner enemy. I think this enemy did come and go quite quickly, despite being one of the game's best designs, at least in my opinion. Definitely let me know down below what you guys think of this enemy type. But just a massive guy with a hat covering his face, or like a bag, whatever it is, and then he's just carrying around a massive axe. It's such a terrifying and cool design, and I'm surprised they literally showcased this enemy once. And that was within maybe the first 10 to 20 minutes of the game, and then once that was done, you don't see this enemy again unless you played Mercenaries or something, or replayed the first mission. So I definitely think they need to make this enemy either a reoccurring enemy that comes up a couple of times throughout the village, maybe different designs of one, so then maybe they had, let's say, 3 executioners in the village scattered throughout across the areas. Or they could make it a type of enemy that is more of a stalker type for the village segment of the game, and it just chases you around. You can incapacitate it, but you can't take it out fully. I think that's probably less likely to be the route they take, as that would change the nature of that beginning segment of the game a lot. But if they did go about that way, I wouldn't be too fussed, as it would be a nice thing to spice up the original Resident Evil 5 experience. Another improvement over the original that they could go for with the remake, and I think this is a given, is creating a more synchronized chemistry between both Chris and Sheva, and of course expanding on their movesets, their combos, improving the AI, and I think everything just around the co-op system. It did seem that with the Resident Evil 4's remake they did increase the AI segments, which could potentially have been a like little pseudo testing phase for the RE5 AI system. And then just going back onto what I said to start this point, I think it would be really cool if they did expand upon the variation in moveset between Chris and Sheva, and I'm sure many of you will agree that this is definitely one of those key aspects of RE5 that made it so great. Like, yes, co-op does take away from the survival horror aspect to an extent, but I think a lot of us did have a lot of memories generated from this co-op system, and I think it would be an absolute crime if they did take this away from the remake and made RE5 a solo game, for example. That would be a pretty crazy decision to make, but hopefully that shouldn't be the case. And moving on to our next point, we have incorporating the parry from Resident Evil 4's remake alongside the emphasis on the knife. So they could also of course bring in that knife upgrade system and then have a variation between both characters where Chris with his massive knife has more power, but it's slower, and then Sheva has a little bit less damage but more speed, and you can potentially upgrade that further and further where Sheva's becomes extremely fast and then Chris's becomes quite strong but still slow. Of course, definitely let me know down below how you guys think they could improve upon this system. And then another thing that they could potentially add, which would be interesting, but I think it could definitely be incorporated quite easily, and that is adding a proper merchant, possibly even the RE4 merchant if he is as much of a traveller as the character seems to be. And then this of course would remove that intermission phase where you're buying and selling to an unknown dealer. I'm still to this day I'm unsure how that buying system works in the lore. Maybe it's just the military, no clue, but maybe just adding that merchant from Resident Evil 4 would give a bit more context as to where these weapons are coming from. But as always guys, definitely let me know what you think down below about a potential physical merchant within these chapters to buy your weapons and sell stuff to, as I think that would definitely be a welcome change, at least in my eyes, but once again, let me know down below. And then I think there are a bunch of other little changes that I think we are likely to expect, like expanding on the mercenaries mode, for example, and just overall player mobility. I think we'll definitely have an increase in this title, as we saw with Resident Evil 4's remake. I hope they do keep the amount of characters they had in the original Resident Evil 5, as I think they did add quite a few characters when the Gold Edition came out. Correct me if I'm wrong. It would be really cool to see if they launched the title with a bunch of characters, including like Barry, Rebecca, Jill, and so on. And then of course Wesker was a pretty cool villain to play as. It would be really cool if they did add in Claire and Leon, which I think wouldn't be too far-fetched, as they do already have the RE Engine assets, and with the Gold Edition approach that they took with the original, they did start to add in characters that weren't even in the original story anyways, like Barry and Rebecca. So I don't see why they wouldn't add in other characters from the other stories that are just not branching together at that point in the timeline. But once again, time will tell as to how they approach this. There are obviously a few other little things they could do as well with expanding the weapon range, which is I've put a question mark in my notes for this one, because they could go the approach where it's a faithful remake and they don't want to add new weapons, but then it is a remake opposed to a remaster, so what's the issue if they were to add a few more weapons and possibly even weapon attachments and customization? I think that would be a really cool idea for them to implement. And then the final little thing I had was the inventory system. So of course, as many of you may already know if you've played Resident Evil 5, they dropped the briefcase, can't even speak anymore. They dropped that system for the very simplified menu system where you just click on controller. You would have clicked the D-pad to switch between your weapons and whatnot, and then if you pressed Y or triangle, you would bring up that 3x3 grid where you can simply just click on an item and equip it. No item had a bigger space capacity than the other, they were all the exact same. So I think for a co-op game, this is a pretty good system. I know compared to Resident Evil 4 system, it's not as fleshed out, but in my head, I'm just thinking, if they were to make the game split screen co-op, how would the briefcase system work? As it would be a big grid, and will it take up too much space? Who knows? Maybe it pauses the game for both characters, or both sides while they're in the inventory, but that also doesn't make too much sense, as if you're playing co-op online, does that pause the game for them as well? But I think the easy solution to that would just simply be, if you go into your inventory in co-op online play, it doesn't pause the game, so you still get hit around, and if you get hit, maybe it knocks you out of your inventory. I'm not too sure how they could go about this. And then of course in co-op split screen, they could easily just make it that if they do add the briefcase system and it's got the massive grid, it just simply pauses the game for both characters. They're both pushed into their inventory system with the massive grid, and then the entire game is paused like you would see in Resident Evil 4. But with that said, guys, that does bring us to the end of this video. Definitely let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section as to what you think should be included in the Resident Evil 5 remake. I look forward to reading all of your comments. As always, a like would be extremely appreciated if you did enjoy the video, and subscribe for a lot more Resident Evil content. Don't forget to join our Discord, link is at the top of the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.